Okay, now we've got sound. Sound, water, connection. Seems good. You see here. Okay, now we've got sound. Yep, working. All right. Today should be, as I drop my phone, today should be fun stream, actually. I've been meaning to do this one for a while. And it's about a concept that I've discussed before, and that is that of bad words, quote unquote. And what are, bad words, and what makes them bad, because it's not as obvious as what we think. The words that we think of as bad are not actually bad, and the words that we don't think of as bad are actually horrible. And I'm going to explain what makes a bad word, or what makes a word bad, and we are going to make a list of bad words that we're going to try and avoid saying on these streams. And it is not curse words, because that is different. We are going to talk a little bit about curse words, and because I think that it's relevant, and what is interesting about curse words is that they are four-letter words, almost always. So, I mean, almost always. Shit. Like, I don't know what I can say on live stream. I haven't actually checked the community guidelines, but so I don't want to say too much, and then they'll throw me off. But you know what I'm talking about. Four-letter words. Start with F, start with S, start with C. You get it. But what's interesting is that they're all four-letter words, and not only are they almost all four-letter words, they are all words that can be used for almost anything. You could be like, that car is the shit, and that car is a piece of shit, and they mean entirely different things, and that means something entirely different to my dog took a shit, and you can do this with literally any one of these four-letter quote-unquote curse words. But these are not the words that I want to discuss mostly as far as what are bad words. These words, though, are fascinating because it falls within that whole idea of Sentient Singularity Theory. States that everything's built on four primary perspectives: inside, outside, separate, and oneness. We know that four-chord songs are basically like almost every pop song, and there's something about the number four that is linked to your brain recognizing completeness or like stability, and it's like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It's almost like that 1, 2, 3 like leads you, and then you feel like something has to come next. But if you're like 1, 2, 3, 4, it's like it circles back around almost, and it's final. But these words, these four-letter words, are interesting because their meaning comes from their context in which they're used. Hence why my dog took a shit, my car is a piece of shit, and that car is the shit, all use the same word, but the meaning is entirely different each time. It's three totally different meanings. And there's even more meanings to it, I would think. We're going to actually try and break it down, how many different general meanings there are to each one of these words. I'm sure that it's going to be about the same for each one, is what I'm predicting. So every curse word will have three meanings to it. And it's not even just curse words, or four-letter curse words, but it is very often four-letter curse words that have practically infinite meaning, and it just depends on the I guess on the context. So I'm trying to think right now, that's three. Car is the shit, car is a piece of shit, dog took a shit. But then you can also say, like, no, that's still three. I wonder if you can get it to four, but I at least three for now. We're gonna come back to it. But the words that are actually bad are the words that are not curse words. They are words that have no meaning. And these words are sometimes words that used to have meaning, but they don't anymore. Sometimes they are words that never had any meaning because they were originally created by people who didn't describe something, or who didn't understand something to describe something that they didn't understand, and they didn't realize that they didn't understand it. Words like religion, okay, or even esoteric. I guess esoteric today is like, it's the way in which it's used today is meaningless. But I get what it's meant to mean, but it's still meaningless today. It used to mean like reserved for a select few, but and usually associated with wisdom of a certain kind that's abstract. And then now it just means vague to the point of useless, and also like totally meaningless and irrelevant, basically. But is how it's used. So if it's used as like almost an insult. It's like if you say everything's consciousness, they're like, well, that's esoteric. It's like, okay, what does that really mean? And we're going to get into that a bit too, because it's linked to this concept of a bad word. It is linked to this concept of falsifiability and unfalsifiable things. Is something falsifiable? Is it confirmable? Is it unfalsifiable? And Sam Harris was discussing this in a podcast recently about how he was basically, Lex Friedman, I'm going to play the clip in a minute, was like, what do you think about panpsychism, the idea that everything is consciousness? And he's like, well, I don't know how much that resonates with me, because it just seems unfalsifiable. It's like, well, let's break down what that word means, unfalsifiable. And maybe there's a reason that it's unfalsifiable, and maybe that's only because you can't, maybe something is just not falsifiable because it's always confirmed every time it's observed. It's like existence. It's like, go look for existence and then go look for non-existence. You cannot confirm, or you can constantly confirm the existence of existence, and you cannot falsify the existence of non-existence, but at least in observation. But you can in logic, but you can't in observation. And this is very relevant to the direction that I guess you could say the sciences are going, as I've said before. But other bad words are, ironically, another one is science. Science is a terrible word, and it means the same exact thing as religion now. And it's used by people who don't understand what it originally was, and they call things that are just, they use it as a substitute for the word truth. But you can't use science as a substitute for the word truth, and you can't use religion as a substitute for the word truth. And it's time to abandon both of these words. It's funny because we had quote unquote religion, then people said, okay, it's time to do away with that old nonsense, and it's time to embrace science. And then now it's time to leave both of them behind. And we need to embrace just being super literal with our language, which is like, that is the truth. That is true. Instead of, that's science. Or even like, that's a fact. Because what is a fact? A fact is something that you assume is true for everybody, but is at least only true for your subjective perspective. But maybe it is true for everybody, but maybe it's not. You don't know, and that's the thing. And a fact doesn't differentiate between what is subjectively true and what is objectively true. And this is something that we need to overcome, because everything going forward is going to be a superposition structure when it comes to understanding reality. So you're going to need to be able to say, this is my subjective experience, or this is subjectively true, and this is it's not necessarily objectively true, and that's objectively true. But we can understand the relationships of how those are intertwined. But there are so many words, though, that at this point are bad words that really need to be done away with, because every time you use a word like esoteric, pseudoscience, science, religion, magic, okay? Magic it's a bad word. It means to not exist. It's like, what do we use the word magic for? Well, we use it to describe things that are impossible. It's like, well, that's magic. Why is it magic? Because it's impossible. Okay. So guess what? In reality, that's a useless word. It describes a concept to us, and same with science, and same with, religion almost, and esoteric. But really what's interesting about these words is, if they're anything at all, they describe a feeling that we can have. So you can have a feeling of something being esoteric. You can have a feeling of something being science. And you're like, look at it, and it has this gives you this feeling of being, analytical and logical and objective and rational. Then you look at religion, and it gives you this feel of dogma and irrationality, and at least, subjectively, and faith. And esoteric is this idea of just like, it's just like vague and ungraspable. It's like really overly complicated. These are feelings. And they're feelings to describe things that don't actually exist in observation. They only exist internally as a feeling. And if we want to keep these words, then maybe we need to recognize that they are actually feelings at this point. And science is no longer discussed as that of a method, but is now discussed as that of a tone, a scientific tone, or a religious tone. But science is discussed in a religious tone, and these days very often, which, what is religion? I don't know. It's a tone. It's a tone of dogma, of acceptance, blind acceptance and faith. It's like when people say things like, I'm pro this, I'm anti that, as far as scientific concepts go. I'm not going to say, certain words, but like, I'm pro getting shots. Okay, you're pro getting shots? Why? Because trust the science. It's like there's so much faith placed in quote unquote science these days. It is religion, essentially. It has a religious feel to it. To those who are familiar with theological traditions, and who are also familiar with I don't even want to say hard sciences. Maybe we need a new word, but with the academic environment, I'll say that. With the academic and research environment, that's the best. See, this is what I mean by like why these words are bad. They don't allow us to press forward and be clear. And you need to be clear. You have so much to gain from being clear. So when we do away with words like, oh, that's hard sciences and soft sciences and social sciences, it's like, well, maybe we should just say experimentation, research, academia, even. I mean, I don't really know what academia is losing its meaning to, just slower than the others, but because it's institutionally, it's more intrinsically linked to an institution. But that institution, if academia means anything, it just means like accredited by society, if anything. But it's associated with basically a feeling. It's like academia is, intellectuals. This is another one of those bad words. Is you see people share those words. It's like, I'm an intellectual, or there was like a Facebook group years ago, and I don't even know if it still exists. This was when people were actually still using Facebook, and the group was called the Intellectualist or something like that. And it's like, oh, you're an intellectualist? Well, good for you. You think? It's like you're alone. You think you're alone in thinking? It's a crazy idea. And I was speaking to somebody today who they said to me, why do we need? He said that Christianity and Judaism and Islam were basically just control mechanisms and were not deep. They were shallow, which is wrong. But I understand. I used to say that too. And he said, why can't we just be spiritual? And I said to him, if you have a spirit, meaning you are a sentient being, then you are spiritual. You don't need to try and be spiritual. Being spiritual is not a positive action. It is just constant. You have a spirit because you're sentient. You are therefore spiritual. You have a mind because you are conscious. You are therefore intellectual. There is no, I'm an intellectualist and I'm spiritual. But when we back up and we realize these are also just feelings. Spirituality, to be spiritual, has like this feel of like new agey and like being in touch with your feelings and like, just thinking about the soul and I don't know, the afterlife, things like that. That is the feel that we get from like spiritual, the word spiritual. But then we have this word intellectual, and that feeling that's associated with it is like cold computation almost. It's the opposite of spiritual. But the reality is that you are simultaneously spiritual and intellectual because you are simultaneously feeling and thinking. And you cannot not be. You cannot not be feeling, and you cannot not be thinking. This idea, even of psychology, where people say like, oh, it's a sociopath. They're a sociopath. I don't even think that sociopaths exist. I think sociopathy is something that just can always exist when you care more about yourself than you do about someone else that's calling you a sociopath. That's when you're a sociopath. But like you're not actually a sociopath. You can't actually exist without feelings. Feelings is what gives you your conscious awareness to do anything. Feelings are when you take your thoughts and you self-reference them, you reference them to yourself. So what is you put them into the context of you, and then it produces a feeling. But that's all it is, and you can't lack that. If you did, you would be dead. You would not be able to survive. You would starve and dehydrate as an infant. Like, there's no way that you could survive as a sociopath, as a true sociopath. But we have this word that labels people as, oh, they're a sociopath. No, there are people, it's a scale like, like an autism scale, or I don't know, like I don't want to say hyperactivity, but an activity scale. Some people are more sedentary, some people are less, some people can concentrate and sit in a desk for hours on end, some people cannot, and they have to go outside and be working with their hands, and some people are socially awkward, in front of a crowd, and some people are socially awkward in front of their friends, and like some people are almost never socially awkward, but some people are almost never emotional about the people that they deal with in their daily lives. But that doesn't mean that they have no feelings. They have feelings about themselves, and those feelings about themselves trump their feelings for others. But that doesn't mean they don't have feelings. And it just manifests in social situations. So, but these ideas, these words that we have been using to substitute for the word truth, even esoteric is a substitution for the word truth. It just means like vague truth. It's like foggy truth. The truth that's hard to see, which is the original definition of the word almost. But even then, it still represents a feeling. Whereas like, truth is not a feeling. I mean, you can say that your truth is an experience, is an experience, and that is a feeling, it basically involves feelings, but it is not. Truth is not a feeling. A fact is not a feeling, which is a subjective truth. Might also be an objective truth, but it's at least a subjective truth. You say that's a fact. It's like subjective to that circumstance. Is a fact that it is nighttime right now. Okay? That's a fact. It's also subjective. But you could say it's objective because it's nighttime to everybody around me, but it's not actually nighttime to everybody, so it's not an objective truth. It's a subjective truth. But it is kind of factual in that if you were in the context that I'm in, you would perceive that same truth. That's kind of what a fact is. It's not a feeling. And these words like esoteric, science, intellectual, spiritual, religion, esoteric, I don't know if I said that one already. These are also, they are feelings, and that's it. But we use them to describe, when we use them to describe our objective world, we are wasting everyone's time. And not only we're wasting everyone's time, we're using words that cannot be defined in the context that they are being used, and that means that they're not just useless because you are within relativity and you only have a specific amount of time and energy to deal with in the circumstances that you're in within relativity. Any wasting of time is not it's not neutral. It's not that it's not good or bad. It is intrinsically bad, or it is emergently bad, essentially. So to use words like esoteric, religion, science, spiritual, intellectual, even academic at this point, I mean, it's kind of it's not quite outdated yet, but it's getting there. Just give it like 5 years. But 10 at the max. But everything's happening faster than I expected. I predicted a lot about where the world is at right now, but I also predicted that it was like 10 years away instead of like 2 years away. So every time I think something in my mind is quite a bit further down the road these days, then I actually assume that it's actually much closer than it appears in my mind, because that is what's happening in the rest of the world and in everything. So, but we're going to start listing these words out. We're going to start breaking them down in the stream and see what words are truly bad words that we should actually avoid trying to say, because every time you say them, you're being counterproductive. You are using a word that literally cannot help you make sense of something in a situation, and it is bound to confuse everybody involved in the communication and also waste everybody's time, which means it is literally bad. It's not just bad because we labeled it a bad word like shit. Why is shit a bad word? I don't know. Probably because it's a 4-letter word that whose context is defined by whose definition is defined by the context. there's something about words like that that are thought of as bad because probably, and we're going to look it up, they didn't have an objective meaning, but the context does provide the meaning. That's not true with the words like science and religion and these other things. And what's worse is that when we use those words, we think that the context defines them, but it doesn't. And you can prove it by trying to not use them and see how much better the communication is. So instead of saying, isn't religion fake? What about religion is fake? Like, tell me that it's literally a statement that cannot be answered, because what do you even mean? You mean it's not possible to answer that question. So you have to say, isn't it fake that, and I'm not saying this is fake, I believe in scripture, but if you don't, then you could say something like, isn't the idea that God wrote the Bible even through other people, that's got to be fake, you could say. And that is a specific statement instead of, yeah, religion, it's fake. It's like, what do you mean religion is fake? Is the holiday of Christmas fake? Was Jesus a real person? Does the Bible have lessons in it? Like, are the Ten Commandments good rules to live by? Like, what about religion is fake? You can't say something like that. And the same thing happens when you say, well, that's just science. That's the science. What's the science? What is the science? Does that drug is that drug safe? I don't know. People will say, well, that's the science. It's safe. That's the science. Why? Like, don't use the word science, and you could actually now get down to the essential details that are necessary to be included in order to have a statement that is able to be understood. And that's true of all of these words. Don't say esoteric. Like, I wrote once I wrote that paper that I'll share in a minute, just because it does have that esoteric feel to it, and it's called The Theory of Every0ne, and it's just one page, and it's kind of like I don't really know what it is. It's like a poem, but it's also like an outline, but it's also just a description of reality, and about the forces of reality. And I read it once to my family, and my dad was like, I don't know, it seems kind of esoteric. And I was like, well, what does that mean? It's like, and it was used as basically not an insult, but like as a dismissive statement, not as a descriptive statement. To say that's esoteric is not to just say, to describe something. It is to also judge it. And it's fine. I don't feel like upset by that statement. I get why he said it. And if anything does have an esoteric feel to it, it is definitely this one page. But it's still not a helpful statement to be said as a statement. It maybe as just a discussion of how something makes you feel. You could say, well, that song makes me feel esoteric. That song makes me feel spiritual. That song makes me feel intellectual. That is actually a useful context to these terms, but that took me actually like a while to figure out, because I've been saying that the word esoteric and religion were nonsense words for about a year now, and then science a little bit later, but I just thought that they were completely useless. But I also recognized that we were kind of trapped by them, so that we had to use them in certain instances, which really was frustrating, because when you say something like, oh, I was always interested in hard sciences, it's like, but you also think science is a distracting term that distracts us away from understanding. It's frustrating because I don't know what other word to use naturally in that instance. You have to describe what you are trying to get at, and there isn't really it's not like there's a substitute word for the word for what we currently have for science. You can't. And it is not the word that's bad. It's the context that we use the word. So science as a method, you could say that is science. What is science? Science is a method of experimentation through defined procedures to hedge against bias, biased results. This is something that makes sense, but if it's anything more than that, now means nothing. Things can only have one meaning, and if they're actually going to be like a substitute for the word truth, they can only have one meaning. And words like religion, science, esoteric, spiritual, intellectual, even if you think that they are not being used as substitutes for the word truth, they absolutely are. And I would say anybody that disagrees with that is incorrect. Like that, it's to say to explore yourself spiritually or to explore spirituality is to pursue truth. To explore something intellectually is to pursue truth. To explore the esoteric is to pursue truth. To learn quote unquote learn science is to pursue truth. To go to religious school is to pursue truth. All of these things are substitutes for the word truth, and you cannot have a word that has that is a substitute for the word truth that has dual meaning. And any word that does have multiple meanings has to be a word that follows a very specific pattern, and that pattern is going to be one that's similar to like the word shit or crap or many other words that are usually curse words. And we're going to look up in a minute why we even started calling these things curse words, because I don't know. And they do have a very consistent pattern of just only having their meaning defined by the context that they're in. And that's not true. You can't do that with a word that is meant to be a substitute for the word truth. It is its own context. The truth is its own context. There is no context for the truth outside of the truth. And so you can't rely on context to ensure that words like religion and science are well understood. You can say scientific method, but I would say that at that point it is a different term. Even though it's using the same word, it's a different term. It has a totally different meaning. Then that's science. Climate science, social science, and biological science, like political science. It's like all of these words are meant to be substitute. All of these instances of the word of the use of the word science are substitutes for the word truth. Political truth, biological truth, social truth. That's what it's meant to mean, So I always thought it was interesting. I have a bachelor's of science in finance. I always wondered. I was like, who decided that finance was a science? Like, we were just learning about arbitrage and putting things in Roth IRAs and investing in, stock market via diversified portfolio. It's like, why is this science? How is this science? Is it just through, I guess, experience and observation, testing. Like, what makes it science? And at what point is something not science? Why are some things hard science? And why are some things not? I used to be so dogmatic about that word science that I was like happy that I got a bachelor's of science in finance, because I remember thinking like I didn't want a bachelor of arts, and I thought it could have gone the other way. Yeah, almost, because like it's just much more subjective than people think. Plus, it's goal dependent, as are most things, but it's very obviously goal dependent. Any kind of financing. So, and there's it's like cooking. That's the thing, is I always thought it was like cooking. It's like you can cook in many different ways and be a decent cook, but there isn't like one way to cook. And this is the cooking science. And if you like your pizza thin or you like your pizza thick crust, like one of those is violating, the cooking science. But financing and finance is very similar to cooking. And I was like, cooking's kind of more like an art than it is a science. Is just always how I felt about it. And it's kind of both, but whatever that means. Art is another one of those words. It's like, what is art? Art has to be, and it's also lost its meaning. It's become a meaningless term almost. Art is something that, when that word does have meaning, it is something that's just meant to be enjoyed. Music is art. Sculpture is art. Painting is art. But if I, look at this knife right here, this one blade of the Europe Blade Show, it's a fascinating engineering masterpiece. There's nothing else like it. It's amazing. It's beautiful. It's fascinating. Is this art? Or is it just, good design? Is good design just art? Is just aesthetic? That would mean that aesthetics are just art. But that's blurring the meaning. And it's like, well, now art means nothing. Everything can be a work of art. And also, whether or not something looks good is in the eye of the beholder. For the most part. There is also like objective beauty. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to we might look at a stream that Eric Weinstein did with Joe Rogan in a minute, or later on in the stream, to show them having an argument about whether or not objective talent or like objective beauty actually exists. And it definitely does. And in it, Joe Rogan is being difficult. He's playing the devil's advocate, but he's not saying that he's playing the devil's advocate. He's like just doing it, which if you're going to do it, you should say that you're doing it so that it's clear that you're not just denying that like talent exists. But all right, let's see the questions. What of these words, love, Lord, Yahweh? These are great questions. We'll talk about it. One of those is not like the other. The count always depends on perspective. Reality is fuzzy and infinitesimal. There is no 4 unless you decide that we are counting. I would say 4 letters are really 36 hash marks or 120 grams of ink. No, I disagree. 4, it's not 4 letters. We see it 4 letters in words, but it's 4 chords in songs, and it's 4 perspectives in orientation outside of relativity and within multiplicity. And it's 4 legs on a table to be truly stable. It's 4 legs on, animals that are running, most animals are, quadrupeds. They have 4 legs, because at that point you have achieved stability that also allows for independence. So the thing is about the reason why people say, well, isn't 3 stable too? Why can't you have 3? And Yeah, you can have a stool that has 3 legs, but the thing is that you won't see that in any kind of dynamic structure um, like a gazelle or a lion or a tiger or a horse. And the reason why is because what 4 legs allows you to do is it allows you to put 3 legs on the ground and then move one independently. So you have your 4 legs, and now you can just kind of move one around, do whatever you need. But if you have 3, and you're not a human where you are constantly balancing on 2 legs, which is extremely rare, other than birds, but you have 3, when you pick one up, now you're unstable. And so in a dynamic structure, it doesn't work to have 3 legs, but even if it does work in a stool. But you can do it in like a tricycle because you have wheels, but you can't do it in a gazelle because the legs are moving, as opposed to the legs are stationary and just a wheel is turning to allow for that leg to be stationary on like a tricycle. But that's why 4 is still the number of completeness, because 3 is the number of, it's almost like 4 is the number of completeness because 3 is the number of completeness. Or it's like 4 is the number of stability because 3 is the number of completeness. Because if 3 wasn't stable, so if 3 legs weren't stable, so that you could use the 4th one independently, then 4 legs wouldn't allow for stability and also independence. Okay, so like if 3 allows for stability, then 4 allows for stability and independence. So sovereignty almost. It's like you're not constrained as much. If you have 3 legs, if you're a 3-legged gazelle, you cannot use one of them to dig in the ground. You need 4 legs because you need 3 of them to stand on and 1 to dig in the ground in order to essentially still be able to stand, just to be able to stand. So it's also that 3 for some reason it's where our mind starts building a pattern of generationality. So you have if I just told you there were 2 numbers, one of them was 2 and the other one was 4, and then I said, what's the next number? The reality is that let's say this, because I started at 2. Let's say I start at 1, and then the next number is 3, and I say, what's the next number? You don't know. It could be 6, and it could also be 4, because you do 3 plus 1. So like Fibonacci sequence kind of. So you don't know. You need that 3rd one to show the directionality and within a system. So if you say it's 1 and then 3 and then 5, then I said, what's the next number? You'd be like 7. But if I said 1 and 3, then it could be 4, and it could be 6, and it could be, I don't know, probably just 4 and 6 that I can think of. But that's still 2 options, not 1. It doesn't show you where you're going, essentially, just 2. So there's something about just having 3 numbers or instances of data in a sequence that allows you to extrapolate from there on out a pattern much more reliably than you would be able to if you just had two, instances of data in a sequence. And from one instance of data in a sequence, the question is, can you actually extrapolate out from one? And according to sentient singularity theory, yes, you can. And that is what sentient singularity theory is you start with one and you say, okay, what's next? What's next? What's next? What's next? Normally, people would say you can't know what's next in a pattern because you don't have enough data. But that's not true if you're contextualize things properly and you realize like that you have a constraint of intrinsic oneness of existence itself, and therefore you can build from there, and it causes constraints that give you more bits of data than you would have originally had. And that's what the four primary perspectives do. It's like you think about the oneness of yourself and the separateness of yourself from another. So if you can say, if you have the perspective of oneness, that means like I am one with my body. Okay, fair enough. And I'm separate. Okay, what are you separate from? Probably something that's not your body, because if you do perceive separateness, that means you're perceiving something that you don't view as one with you. And so you have more data. But it's built on the idea of oneness, because something, you have to have oneness with yourself in order to view yourself as separate from something else. So you need to have that initial perspective, I guess, or information that you are intrinsically one in order to then go on to the next step. And if you're operating in the constraints of existence itself and you can't go outside of existence because there's nothing outside of existence, anything outside existence is non-existent and therefore doesn't exist, then you are constrained to go inside of existence. And something can be inside of existence and also separate from you. So, or outside of you. So you could say something is outside of you, and you could say I'm separate from my dog, and I'm one with my spouse, and I'm inside of the universe, and I'm outside of my cells. Like my cells are inside of me, and like molecules are inside of them, and they are outside of molecules, and they are separate from each other, but they are, one with me, essentially. And so it allows for orientation outside of relativity. Inside and outside are not relativity. It's, relativity is like smaller, bigger, faster, slower, hotter, cooler, like that. Like that's relativity. It's anything that's relative is a scale. People say, well, no, I've had people say, no, your primary perspectives are relative. No, relativity is smoothness. It is a sliding scale of variance. It's not objective lines without overlap. And that's these inside and outside. If you're inside of something, then you're also not outside of it. I mean, unless get like a little bit, like, I don't want to say esoteric, but when you start thinking about God, it's a little different because he's everything, but that's unique to God. But outside of God, or I guess you could say outside of God is inside of God, because there's nothing actually outside of God. It's all within God. But outside of his sovereignty, you have our sovereignty, and that is why we are separate, but yet we are also one, because there's nothing outside of God. There's nothing that isn't sustained by that that sentient, the energy coming from that sentient being, animating it. So this language is very tough. Language is the most important thing going forward into a new field or a new paradigm or a new era, because we have to come up with a new way of speaking about old things, and we also have to basically come to a collective decision on how we're going to speak about new things, and that also collective decision has to include collective understanding of what these new things are, and that has to be simultaneous with the labeling of it, which is tough. And we're trying to describe things that we've never said before. So, like, when something is metaphorical and literal at the same time, I came up with the word super literal, and we're working on merch, but we need that term. It's like a coin is heads and tails. So what's the word that is heads and tails at the same time? If tails is metaphorical truth and heads is literal truth, then what if a truth is metaphorical and literal at the same time? What's the word for heads and tails at the simultaneously? What's the superposition? The word to that it basically it's like it's not just a substitute for the word truth, but it's like truth in every, it's true in every context. That's what we need a word for, and that's what I use the word super literal for. It's super, if something's super literal, it's true in every context. So, when people say, is that metaphorical? Is the Bible literal? Or is it metaphorical? Or is it historical? Or is it prophetic of the future, predicting of the future? It's like, it's super literal. It's all of them simultaneously. And that is also, singularity is the super literal truth of inside, outside, separate, and oneness. So when something has the perspective of inside and the perspective of outside and the perspective of separate and the perspective of oneness, these are four sides or four views of one state of being. That is what I call singularity, which is, or it's a singularity of sentience, sentient singularity. It is when you feel that you are you and you exist. It's like, I think, what is it, Descartes, I think, said, I think, therefore I am. He was wrong. He wasn't wrong, because thinking is like halfway between feeling and computing. So to compute is just to, like, I guess, crunch, is to execute a process. Okay, that's what it means. But somebody whose exterior has to be thinking about what that process is and the context of it and the goal of it and everything like that. Your computer doesn't think, it computes. You think for your computer computes for you. But a sentient being feels, which is thinking when that thinking, or it's information processing when that information processing is referenced around the self, most fundamentally, which is actually also kind of simultaneously the process of thinking. It's funny because we have this idea of, like, IQ, or this, I guess, label of for this measurement that we have, that we can measure, called IQ, and it is just a sliding scale. It's like, how strong are you? How fast of a runner are you? How much can you bench? It's like, what's your 1 rep max? That's the same thing as saying, like, what's your IQ? And then people tried to come up with like the idea of EQ, like your emotional, you know, quotient, essentially. Like, what is your, I don't know, your emotional intelligence, as people say it. But that doesn't really make sense because we assume that intelligence is not emotional when we say IQ. Intelligence quotient is intellect. Intelligence is associated with intellectual or intellect, which is like thinking, cold thinking, as we think about it, as we normally think about it. But the reality is that you can't objectively think about anything unless you are referencing it to yourself and as the context. And if you're doing that, then you're feeling like you are. You cannot think any other way. You can't. This is why people in politics who don't have experience with like the thing that they're passionate about, like if you're passionate about I don't know, like racism, or like, I don't know, some like self-defense, anything, gun control, weapons control, violence, anything like that. If you're passionate about oppression in any way, but you're passionate about like others not being oppressed, but you have not had personal firsthand like feeling of oppression where it's like in some way you actually were oppressed. That doesn't mean that you you have physical violence inflicted on you, but if something that could potentially be an I guess an essential action for you is infringed upon by the state or someone else, I don't know, the gang in the neighborhood, doesn't matter, like, then you have been oppressed, even if it's just legal. But there is a difference between, then there's multiple levels of it. There's, you're legally oppressed, and then you are physically oppressed, and those are two different things, but they're also, one leads to the other. But if you don't have that ability to think about that, about oppression, and think about it from your perspective of being oppressed, not like, oh, that guy is oppressed, but you as the one who's oppressed, your political wisdom is usually not there, because you actually can't objectively think about oppression if you aren't thinking about it from the perspective of you being oppressed. Because if you're thinking about somebody else being oppressed, then you are literally subjectively, just like you're thinking about oppression subjectively. There's two objective perspectives to think about oppression. One of them is God's perspective. The other is your perspective. And anything else is a subjective, view of oppression. And if your understanding of oppression or anything else is based upon a subjective understanding, then it's based on a subjective understanding, and that is going to give you problems when you start to apply it in multiple, subjective and different circumstances. So this is why, like nobody should be making rules of the road if you don't drive. Like, if you don't drive in a car, and I don't just mean like you have driven like before, I mean like you drive. It is part of your life to drive. If that isn't part of your life, you should definitely not have a say in what the rules of the road are. If you don't, I don't know, like if you don't carry a firearm, you should not be allowed to make the rules for, firearms. Like, you need an objective perspective in order to think logically about something. Otherwise, you just spiral and you end up just being dogmatically fearful, which is a specific, you can't avoid having a feeling. So when people say, oh, well, they're just being emotional about it. No, it's not just that they're being emotional. You're being emotional. If you think you're being logical, and you probably do have a logical perspective, but it's not just that you're being logical. You do have a feeling. You are being emotional. Otherwise, you wouldn't value whatever it is that you're arguing about, whatever issue that is. But it is a very specific and feeling, and that feeling is fear. And fear is one of those feelings that is almost like it's a bad feeling, because it is objectively incorrect. There is subjective fear it is bad if you're trying to objectively, examine what is true. So there is subjective, situations that would give you fear, but at the same time, if you really understood the universe and you understood that death is not the end of life, and that God also is looking out for you, and what you think may be curses are actually able to be blessings if you look at them with the right perspective, which that's very hard to do sometimes, especially if it's something that's some blessings cannot be recognized as such until we leave this world. I will just say that. So before people jump on me and be like, oh, well, what about kids with cancer? Is that a blessing? It's like, I guarantee you that in some way it is, but I don't know how, and but God does, and we probably cannot know how in this life, but this is not the end, and eventually you will know how, or at least God knows how. But that's why fear is always a subjective, and that means that it can't be objectively understood. And if it can't be objectively understood, then it's bad. That's what bad is. It's like, it's a word that is counterproductive because it's useless. And if it's used when it's useless, it's counterproductive in relativity, in a finite time and with finite energy. Or I don't even want to say finite energy, but we are limited in relativity. So there's a lot to this. I kind of went off a bit, but it goes in a bunch of different directions, because you can start applying this idea beyond just words, like actions. There are actions that are bad actions, and those actions that are truly bad are going to be actions in which there are very similar patterns that you'll be able to see between bad words and those quote unquote bad actions. So if you say, well, what's a bad action? It's like, I don't know, to kill. Kill is not a bad action. What if you're hunting because you need to survive? What if you're protecting your family and because they're in danger? So, but then you have words like murder. Okay, murder is much more specific. That is a bad action. And there's a reason why it's a bad action. And it is because it is not productive in any way, shape, or form. And if it's not productive, it's counterproductive. And you're going out of your way to do something that is unnecessary, to take a life unnecessarily. That's what murder would be. That's a bad action. And it's unable to be made sense of objectively, logically. It's just, it does not make sense logically. It doesn't matter what they did. If it is murder, it is the killing outside of usefulness or pragmatism. And if it is that, then it is an objective pragmatism, not like, it would be nice if my, neighbor's was gone because his dog craps on my lawn or something like that. That's not pragmatic. But objective pragmatism, as in God's eye view of pragmatism. So you have to consider the objective perspective, which is that God made everybody here, and he made everybody for a reason, and if he made everybody for a reason, then who are you to go and take a life unnecessarily? So that's an objective perspective. Like I said, there's two objective perspectives. One is you, and the other is God. There is nothing else when it comes to understanding. And then you could even say that between those two, your perspective is subjective compared to God's. And that's true. Compared to God's, it is subjective. But compared to every other perspective other than God's, your perspective is the perspective. That's why it's I think, therefore I am. Not like they think, therefore I am. But it's actually the best way to say that is I feel, therefore I am. Not I think, therefore I am. Because it's not specific enough. Thinking is it's like the term consciousness. It's halfway between computation and also, and it includes awareness, but it doesn't define that it requires self-awareness, even though it's actually implied when you dig deeply into the logic of it. But most people have not done that, so it's almost like consciousness is a bad word. And it's probably why it's never actually taken off as a theory. There was an interview that was Kirchai Mungle did. I spoke on it in my last stream with Michael Levin recently. And that guy's work is amazing. I highly suggest watching that stream. I think it was the last stream. I think he's going to win a Nobel Prize. I also think that he's totally wrong about aging and stopping aging, and I don't think Planaria are actually sentient singularities, and so therefore the idea of aging doesn't apply to them. It's you can get old, but Coca-Cola can't get old. I think that his Planaria are Coca-Cola, the corporation. It's a little cell corporation, instead of a unified kingdom that is like you. But this, regardless, in this discussion, Michael Levin is asked about consciousness, and he's like, I don't really care to bring up consciousness. He's like, I don't think that it's most people that claim to study consciousness are actually studying consciousness. He's right. And he was like, I also don't really know exactly what is consciousness, essentially. And I think that nobody really knows what it is. And it's because it's probably a bad word. And I've been having this issue with my paper, Sentient Singularity paper that's coming out very soon. And in it, right here, let's see here. This is the abstract, and in it I have basically I'm using the word consciousness in certain instances, and I've been struggling because sentience is a better word for what I'm trying to say usually, but when I'm trying to differentiate it a little bit, I don't really know exactly what word to use because consciousness is too vague, but sentience is too specific, and I need something that is, I don't know, a little bit different than both of those probably. So I'm saying, where is it? I think I actually deleted what it originally was. Let's see here. Let's go to the bottom. Usually, sometimes, when I'm writing. Okay, yeah. See, I usually put the one that I got rid of at the bottom, so just in case I change my mind. Given that perspectives can only come from a conscious perception by a sentient perceiver and conscious awareness that defines A sentient being can only come from the perception of those perspectives. It is implied that a sentient singularity and its primary perspectives are simultaneously the creation of and creator of each other. And basically, originally I was using the word quantum of consciousness. So it's like a quantum of consciousness and its entangled perspectives. A sentient singularity's quantum of consciousness, or quanta of consciousness, essentially. And they're almost redundant, and I was really struggling. And I basically just did away with all of it at that point. This word quantum of consciousness, which I might change that, but the problem is it really does describe this structure quite well. Or you know what? The only other, here's a better word for it. Potentially. Like, what is consciousness? Consciousness of what? That's the question. And is there a better word that's much more specific that can give us more information? Well, probably. So, let's see here. Here. So I've been calling this the quantum of consciousness, but what if it's this? This has been like a stickler issue for me. And I've just basically gave up on dealing with it right now. I just deleted the word quantum of consciousness from the abstract, I think, and then just continued on. Because it was basically almost redundant, but I needed something that was between, that has to do with awareness, that showed that basically was defining awareness. A quantum of awareness. Awareness of what? Of your feelings? Then it's a sentient singularity. But it's not just your feelings, it's your relation to. Is what I was trying to get at. So consciousness is a bad word. It really is, honestly. I think that's like the lesson for me from the stream is like consciousness may need to be added to the list of bad words because it doesn't really give us any information. What conscious of what? Like a consciousness or just conscious of something? And it's just too vague. It's undefined. It's like spiritual. Consciousness. Here we go. Bad words. We're going to start listing them. Consciousness. Wow. To go from this project to labeling this as a bad word is kind of like pretty funny. Esoteric, religion, science, spiritual, and intellectual. What's more? Bad ones. Okay. How many bones make up the four legs? Well, let me think about it. 1, 2. I mean, if you're counting feet, or are you just counting legs? On what? On like a gazelle or like a? I think it's like 2 segments, but it's more. It's probably like 3 bones, something like that. I don't know. I need to look. Three organically reminds me of a horror story about a biped that has a rod that projects from its stomach to pull itself forward. That is creepy. Now, what you've been saying about perspective makes a lot more sense. Cool. It's working. It's working for me too. I mean, I have not added consciousness to the list of bad words yet. I've thought about it, but I haven't officially done it. Now we've officially done it. That means I have to take it out of my paper as much as possible. And it's not too much in my paper. It's just like 2 parts where it's really there. But the thing is a sentience. This is why originally I was just calling my paper as like my theory as like a filler title of it, because I thought it was the same as everybody else's, so I wasn't even trying to have it have a label, but I was calling it United Quantum Force Theory or United Conscious Force Theory. And that word conscious is just, it's a bad word. I think it has held us back. I mean, so many people are like, yelling at the people that are the anti-woo crowd, I guess you could say, or the people that fancy themselves as the anti-woo crowd, like a Sam Harris type, but then really like he's got like a meditation app. So it's like, are you really the anti-spirituality like crowd if you are you haven't a meditation app called Waking Up? But they might be right. So a lot of times when people are emotionally averse to something, and you think they're being illogical, it usually means, or oftentimes means, I'll say, that they emotionally understand something that they don't intellectually understand, I guess. So that means that their subconscious understands something that their conscious like state does not. So you could say it's like they instinctually understand something and they don't logically understand it. That's a better way of putting it. Or intellect. No, I don't want to say intellectually understand. Logic is another one of those words. It's very hard because we think about it as a substitute for truth. I guess you just say they don't objectively understand it, but they subjectively understand it through their instincts. That's what it means to be like, to subconsciously feel something. And they're averse to the idea of, to the suggestion that this is all about consciousness. And they're not correct because it kind of is about consciousness, but consciousness as a word might be the wrong word to use. And I do think it is. That's why I realized what my theory needed to be called, or what a theory of everything essentially needed to be called, and a fundamental, total, objective theory needed to be called. And it needed to be called something that describes the essential nature of existence itself, and that is of a consciousness, but it's not just a consciousness. Consciousness is too vague. You have to get more specific. What is it that causes that feeling of oneness with yourself, sovereignty, and it is feelings. What is the feeling of oneness? Oneness is a feeling in and of itself. And if it is, which it is, then sentience is the word, not consciousness. Consciousness is almost, to be conscious of something is just to be aware of it almost. But to be conscious of yourself. See, here's the issue. You can be conscious. I can be conscious of my geckos over there that are like running around. And I can also be a consciousness. Okay? And or you could say I can be conscious, but that is often used to mean you are a consciousness, which is not necessarily, they don't have to be the same thing. So you could say he is conscious, but then you could also add to it and say of the fact that it's, daytime, and that changes it entirely almost. It doesn't have to, but it can change it entirely, which is why it's so problematic, this word consciousness or conscious. But and then you could also say you are a consciousness, and then you could say this is all about consciousness. They're not the same exact thing. One is kind of a defining label, and the other is a description. Okay, so but like when I say defining label, I mean not a definition like a description. I mean like also a label. So like a bicycle is the label for the structure that we call a bicycle, but then also there's a description of a bicycle that is, it's two wheels, one in front of the other, attached to a chain that is attached to pedals that use attached to a seat and, attached to handlebars. And that is the description. So to say this is about consciousness is a description, but to say you are a consciousness, that is a label. You are a bicycle. But you can't say this is all about bicycle. But you can't say this is all about consciousness. And you can also say that is a consciousness, or you are a consciousness. I am a consciousness. This makes the word have too many meanings, which makes it have no meanings. Because the reality is that if the fundamental nature of existence is that it is a sentient being, that means that consciousness is truth, essentially. So you can't have a word for truth that is a substitute for the word truth that has multiplicity of meanings. It's going to end up, and this is true of many words, not just almost every word, I would say, probably. I got to think more about it, but it's possible. Where if it has multiple meanings, it has no meaning. This was like once I asked people, I said like marriage is a moral responsibility for, men and women who are attracted to the opposite sex. It's like marriage is a moral responsibility. It's possibly the number one moral responsibility that you have that's a positive responsibility, not like a don't murder, don't steal, don't lie. These are negative responsibilities, but a positive responsibility, one in which it is a responsibility to act instead of to not act. Probably the most important one that you have is it is probably to get married, or it's at least one of them. Maybe it is to take care of yourself and then get married, but what you get there, one of them is a responsibility to someone else, and the other is seen as a responsibility to yourself, even though it is actually also a responsibility to others, because you are composed of sentient beings that are called cells. And they need you. But this is why this convolution of the words consciousness and its meaning is why I went with the word sentience. Because it's specific. Self-aware and feeling, that's what it means. The fundamental nature of existence itself is that it is self-aware, it has a self, and it is aware of itself, and it is feeling. It has feelings. It is that oneness of feeling that gives any entity, any sentient singularity, its oneness. That's what makes it a sentient singularity. It's like Why is Coca-Cola not a sentient singularity? Because it has no feelings. It's composed of people that do have feelings, but it does not have feelings. Like Planaria do not have feelings. Probably. But like an earthworm does have feelings. It's also why you can chop an earthworm in half and it dies, and you chop a Planaria in half and it just like splits into a bunch of others. It's like chopping Coca-Cola in half, and now you've got, you know, I don't know, Coca-Cola and Pepsi. And you chop it again, it's like Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and I don't know, Mr. Pibb or something. It's like you're chopping this company up, and it will reform new boards of directors, new hierarchical systems of management, and new distribution chains and everything like that. This is forming of a new, sensory organs and such. So just because you have organs and it looks like you have a centralized processing structure that we would call a brain, and it's close to an actual brain, but it's not it is a brain, but the thing is it's not a mind. That's the difference. Planaria is not a mind, it's a bunch of minds. Like an ant colony is not a single mind, it's a bunch of minds working cooperatively, and it's not a single mind. Otherwise, if one ant knew something on one side, the rest would as soon as one ant is on board with something, every ant would be on board with it. That's how it would be a mind. But it's not. One ant learns the way through a maze, and then the rest can follow it. But it's not as if one ant learns the way through the maze, and then all of a sudden the entire colony moves as one through the maze because that information was centralized. No, it wasn't centralized. It had a leader, and that leader caused others to follow, and that comes from multiplicity of interacting and cooperative conscious agents, as would it be Donald Hoffman calls his theory conscious agent theory. And for a while I was like, well, that's almost sentient singularity theory. It's almost the exact, his theory is very similar, but there's fundamental differences. One, a conscious agent in his theory is not always like, it's not, I don't think that it's necessarily like the same thing as the sentient singularity. It's almost like it's anything that can be conscious of something else. So you could say, I don't know, like an ant. I don't know how exactly to explain it. This is why it's such a bad word. Conscious agent, I get what he's trying to say. It's almost like sentient singularity theory, but it's not descriptive. And it uses words that have no definition. It's like conscious. Okay, what does conscious mean? I don't know. It could mean that it's a consciousness. It could mean that it's just conscious of something. It could mean that it's conscious of self. If it's conscious of self, then it's a consciousness. If it is just like to be conscious of something else, that is also possible. So you can be both. And it almost takes you being conscious of the self to be conscious of someone else, really. Or of something else, but it's still too vague. An agent, what is an agent? It's the same thing as a consciousness. So it's like a conscious agent. It's like agent theory, or like agents with agency theory. That's almost like more like what it is. It's like conscious agent theory is, it's not even agents with agency theory. To have agency is like to have sovereignty, not just to have awareness. Not just to be aware, but it's just not a good word. It's a terrible word, consciousness, at this point. There are certain ways in which you can make it make sense, but I would say it's just a feeling, to be conscious. It's a feeling. Conscious of what? Whatever you're conscious of right now. Conscious of the lights in front of me. Conscious of the fact that my wife has a shower on. And that's what that noise is, so I'm sorry. But like, it's I don't know if it's picking it up on the mic, but it's an apartment, so you can hear pipes. But it's just, an agent is like, it is, to be an agent is to be singular and also to have some type of like intrinsic oneness and like maybe also some sovereignty. It's like, it is the same thing as a consciousness. So it's like consciousness theory, or agents with agency theory. It's not descriptive enough. Sentient singularity theory is the theory that the essential nature of existence itself is self-aware and having of feelings, okay? Like its own feelings, that's what it means to be sentient. And it is also that it is one, like it is a singular entity. And it also is composed of singular entities within itself. So that's why I use the word, it's not sentient oneness theory, because sentient oneness is like, it's a different perspective. It's like it's almost like at that point everything is one and inseparable. But the reality is that you can't say that the essential nature of existence itself is one and inseparable, but you also can't say that it is, a bunch of totally separate agents. But it's that word singularity in my paper is defined as the superposition structure that is composed of those four primary perspectives of inside, outside, separate, and oneness. So, and that are entangled. To perceive yourself as one, also, now you also perceive things as not one. You can't perceive yourself as one without also thinking about what isn't. And you can't think about what's inside of you and also not think about what would be outside. Essentially, it's like, if I say, what's going on outside? And you're like, you tell me, or what's the weather like outside? And you're like, oh, it's cold. It's like, okay, you had to also think and contextualize what isn't what I'm asking about. So what is inside? And I'm not asking about the weather in, your bedroom. I'm asking about what's the weather outside. So not the weather inside. And you had to, in your attempt to perceive the weather outside, you had to define what would be the weather inside. Even if you don't perceive it, you had to define it. And to define it is almost to perceive it. That's why these perspectives are entangled. It's almost like there's only two perspectives. Inside and outside are two sides of one coin. Separate and oneness are two sides of one coin. They're really the same perspective. And then that's, in the context of existence itself, that's even more able to be tied together. But it's hard for us to think about that because we aren't existence itself. We are within existence. So to us, the perspective of nothing being outside of us, everything that exists is within us. That is not something that that's not a perspective that we normally have. Now, you can kind of feel that perspective and think about it as far as like, if existence is a sentient singularity and you're a sentient singularity, then the pattern that you have is also the pattern of existence for the most part, and therefore, that everything that exists is within you, because everything that exists outside of you is essentially the same as you. So there's nothing outside of you that exists that is different. But that's not really true, because God is unique, because he is existence itself. There's nothing that contains him but him. That's true of us, that we contain ourselves, and but it's also true that we are contained. So it's different. Today I was speaking with Robert Edward Grant, and I said before we're going to have him on the podcast. We spoke about that a bit today, so I am planning that probably this month. If not this month, then definitely next month, I would think. And we're going to go over a lot of incredible work that he's doing. I mean, it's just amazing. It's amazing how much I see my work in, like, the implications of my work in his work, but it just the methodology is so different, and his is probably easier to link to our current structures. So, like, the way that he approaches math is different than me, whereas I have to make these structures, and I do it from scratch, kind of. I'm more focused on structures, I guess, than like ratios, and I mean, I guess his work is also very focused on structure, but I guess my structures are unorthodox in like the way in which they are done, just because I'm not as knowledgeable on like academic mathematics, I guess. But anybody working in this space is bound to go beyond what we normally call academic mathematics, and you have to start building your own structures eventually, or else you can't get even close to a theory of everything. But we're going to talk about have him on here and talk about his work. But we were discussing prime numbers, and he showed this incredible model that he has that are much more complicated than, like, I mean, I don't have any prime number models, but he has some type of program that is graphing integers into spirals, essentially, and into basically a double helix pattern, and it's very, it's structured by the primes. When you look at it, at least it looks like that to me. And I was talking to him about how I think that prime numbers are essentially like, they are a quantized consciousness. They're a quantized sentience. That's what they are. Like, a sentient singularity is prime. And linking that math to sentience is like the next frontier of understanding how to understanding the structure and process of sentience, which could lead to some very crazy technology that allows you to literally control people's minds. But I do think that will happen. I think that these UAP, like the beings responsible for the UAP phenomenon, can do it. But a different stream. If you think about a sentience, or I want to say a consciousness, but I am trying not to use that word. If you think about a sentient being, okay, you're like, what is that sentient being? It has intrinsic oneness. Okay, what does that mean? It means it's only able to be divided by one and itself, which is the same thing. For you to be divided by you is also for you to be divided by one. And so to be divided by is to be able to be split up. Okay, so if I were to say, you, Nick, you are Nick. Okay, can I split you into different pieces of and still like have you remain? No, I can't. If you cut an earthworm in half, it dies. If you cut yourself in half, or me, or your dog, or anything else that is a sentient being into pieces, it's gonna die. Planaria do not die when you cut them into little pieces, which means they're not sentient singularities. They're not. The mathematics of them are not going to be primes. I mean, their cells are going to be. If you take a Planaria cell, just one of their cells, and you cut it in half, it's gonna die. It's gonna die because it is a sentient singularity. But a Planaria that we think of as an organism, but it's really like a corporism. Corporism. That's probably it's a corporism. We needed a word for that. I'm gonna write this down. I've been thinking about it for like over a week. What's a word that's for something that's not quite an organism but appears to be like a Portuguese man of war or something almost, but a corporism. Is that even a word? Let's see. No, corporatism is. Corporatism is a collectivist political ideology. No, a corporism. We have a new word for a new structure of. I don't want to say science. What should we call it? What should we say it? A new structure of life. Or a new observable structure of a new. It's an animated assembly. That's what it is, of some type. But there's two types of animated assemblies, and that would be sentient being, or a sentience, and a corporism. And this one has singularity, and this one is a multiplicity. It's almost like this one is a multiplicity on top of a multiplicity, and this one is a singularity on top of a multiplicity. Yeah. Interesting. A corporism. It's like an organism, but it's like so you could say, what would they be collectively? So this one would be reactive, so it'd be feminine. This one would be active, so it would be masculine. This one would be neutral, which would be like Um, assembly. Assemblies. They're just assemblies. That's such an obnoxious font. It's all about Garamond. Calibri just reminds me of school. And computer is freezing. No. Okay, there we go. If you would like to monetarily support this project and help me get a new computer, there is a link to Patreon below. I'm serious. My computer is reaching the limits. It's MacBook Air, people. It and this document has like 30 tabs. I like this. A corporism and a sentience. These are assemblies. Essentially of life. So, what else is there? You said somebody. Okay. Meta is a 4-letter word. Yes, meta is a 4-letter word. Meta. Let's just put it in here. It's pretty funny. EQ annoying, lollipops for second place in IQ. Yes, I've always felt like it is too, but it's wrong. Okay, the reason why it's annoying lollipops, the idea of like it's like second place medal to say, oh well, he has low IQ but he has high EQ. The reason why that sounds stupid is because it is, but it also probably isn't. But if you really want to put a line between different types of intelligence or different types of cognition, I guess you could say, processing power. The line is intelligence, which is like your ability to think internally about outside. And then there is your ability to act outside, which is also thinking. You're just externally thinking. You know, the mind. Your mind is the world instead of your mind is internal, and separate from the world. It's like you are reacting to the world, and it's like your physical quotient. But I came up with this. The two that I was using was intelligence. External intelligence and internal intelligence, but that doesn't really make sense because intelligence is about like internal. So then I heard Eric Weinstein say this, so I can't take credit for it, but he basically was saying the same concept, but he was saying something much more reasonable, and it's that he said intelligence and outintelligence. And outintelligence would be like your ability to play sports or to dance or to move in the world and process the world through your kinetic physical movement. That is information processing. I mean, there was this guy growing up and probably did not have the highest IQ. And he's a real person. His name is Kadeem Carey. You can look him up, actually. There's videos of him. I think he went to the NFL. He definitely played college football, but he played football at our rival high school, and I actually took his ex-girlfriend on a date, and it was not the first date, but it was the last date, because we went and went to the movies. It's actually just on the side. It's very funny. Kadeem Carey, just to make the point, is an incredible athlete. There is a video on YouTube of him doing a front flip over two people trying to tackle him and landing on his feet in the end zone. Okay? How are you almost intelligent enough to know that you have to, right now, the best move to do is a front flip over the people coming at you? That is incredible. And you have the ability to do it. Not only do you have the ability to do it, you have the wisdom or the mental ability to know that you have, that this is like a good move right now. And I'm a very good martial artist, and I have my skills. I'm a good rock climber. I'm a good martial artist. But like, this is like, I'm not a professional martial artist. He is a professional level football player, even if he didn't make it to the pros. If he didn't, there was some reason why. That wasn't because of his skill. And I think he did make it to the pros, though. But I took this guy's girlfriend on a date. This is just a funny story. Ex-girlfriend. And she was pretty broken up about the fact that she had caught him cheating. And, before I asked her out on a date. And we get to the movies. This was in high school. And in front of me, there's this guy. And he's got a girl under this arm and a girl under this arm. And he's making out with this one. And then he goes and he starts making out with this one. And then he goes and he starts making out with this one. And I'm with this girl. And it's a double date with her and one of her good friends who's dating one of my good friends. And so all of a sudden I hear the girls say, "Is that him? I think that's him. Oh my gosh, that's him." And then they both get up and go to the bathroom, and like crying ensues because the guy in front of us was the girl who I had taken on a date, Kadeem Carey. It was her ex-boyfriend who was Kadeem Carey, and had literally like a girl underneath each arm just making out with both of them in front of us at the movies. It definitely like ruined the date for me, but it also gave me a hilarious story for the ages. And I ended up eventually, marrying my wife. So you can't be upset about any girls that didn't end up being, in your life in any significant way. Once you end up getting married, it's like you got the good one. Hopefully, at least I did, but it is so funny. I was so pissed at the time. I was like, of all the things that could have happened, there, how many movie theaters there are in Tucson, Arizona? Not that many, but enough to where you shouldn't, run into that situation. But it happened. That was real. That is not that's not made up. I couldn't make that up if I tried. I'm not good at like making up stories. I could never write a novel. I can't even remember people's names in like shows that I've watched for years. So it was very funny. But the ability to do that, what he did, I mean, maybe we can even watch it actually. Here, this is funny. So when it's not emotional intelligence, I will say there is like an emotional ability, but it's not like no man has a high quote unquote EQ. No man has a high EQ. Like you could think that you do, but if you compare that to a woman who has a high EQ, there's no comparison. Women can feel the universe. It's like literally built into the fabric of reality because of the lineage structure following the female, like physically manifested form. The lineage structure of the universe follows that directly. They are the tree of life, the branches on the tree of life or they are the flowers on the branches of the tree of life of the universe. Men are just bees flying around it. You cannot feel as well as a woman can feel if you're a man. It's impossible. people say, oh, well, there's feminine men. No. No. It's anytime femininity is being expressed in a man, it's really effeminate. It's not femininity. It's like you can't actually, you cannot actually, as a man, experience true femininity. Just like a woman cannot actually experience true masculinity. It's like a shallow imitation that you're able to like take on. You can do a shallow imitation. Men can do a shallow imitation of femininity, but it's not actually femininity. Femininity is submissiveness, and like most men who act in an effeminate way, in what most people would call feminine, it's not feminine. Feminine is submissive. It's reactive, and many men who are effeminate are not that. They are actually like quite dominating and active. It's funny because they will, like, you see men who are particularly effeminate, and you put them into a situation and they will use like humor or something sometimes, and they will end up just like conversationally dominating a group of not effeminate men. And it is because to be effeminate is not feminine. If actual femininity would be like to go into that group and just go like this and just wait until you're told what to do. Men do not have the ability to like get to truly like embrace this and the way that women do, because it's literally part of them. It's not part of us. But that allows, that same thing that allows for them to embrace femininity is also due to connectedness, and that connectedness allows them to feel to a degree that is objectively on a different level than a man ever could. It's not just like some women can they're more emotionally, aware than men. It's like, no. It's another level. Whether or not they are good at expressing it, or whether or not you can see it, is another thing. But they are always objectively on a level that no man can ever reach. It's impossible. And I know that that's not sanctioned as an idea, and it's also makes no sense with what we've been taught, but it is absolutely true. It is no way for that not to be true. It's no way. So, men are not feminine. There are actions that are feminine. There are actions that are feminine. There are actions that are masculine, but men cannot, they do not tap into like masculine, feminine energy, or they don't have a feminine side, I will say. They don't have a feminine side. Okay? They can have a caring side, they can have a kind side, but these are not feminine traits. These are actually kindness is a masculine trait, actually. Caring is not just like having emotions for someone. Caring is like having the emotions for someone that causes you to care for them. Like, actually. Do you, I don't know, get them a blanket when you think that it's cold, even though they haven't said it's cold, can you get me a blanket? Probably not. But women do this. And my wife is always like trying to like give me the blanket, and like she's always worried that I'm like not covered up enough, but I just run warm. And she's like African descent and I'm Eastern European descent. We run warm and she runs cold, so the AC wars are real in my house. But she will go and like try and put a blanket over me, and I'm like, I'm actually not even cold. Like, I didn't ask for it. She does it with the dog too, like her dog Noah, our dog Noah. Whereas like I just check to make sure that my dog gets water and food every day, and yeah, she like spends time, with me in the office and goes for walks and stuff. But like, it's different. I don't go and get like puzzles. Like, my wife literally goes and gets like puzzles and she's like worried about whether or not Noah is bored. Whereas I'm only worried about whether or not Maya, the dog that was originally mine, is bored if it leads to her being destructive. Like, other than that, like, I don't really care if she's bored, because I don't really think that she is that bored. Like, she just, like, sleeps when I'm working during the day, and, like, that's pretty normal for a dog. And also for, like wolves and things like that. It's like, if they're not doing something because the pack is on the move, like, they're just pretty much, like, lounging around. Sometimes they'll play for a few minutes and they'll go back to sleep. It's fine. But I don't have that like emotional, not emotional, but like it's like, yeah, it's emotions. It's like a connection that is emotional, but it's not just that I don't have, an emotional connection to my dog. Of course I do, but it's that I don't feel the universe telling me that my dog is bored. Like, I have to go and check to make sure that, she's got her food and that's good. Like, whereas women will feel a baby's hunger, like, literally, in a way that they can't even describe it to a man. And but we can solve problems in ways that they could never do it, because we can detach ourselves from the situation. And you need to do that if you're going to solve things objectively sometimes. But you need to be connected to the situation to know that you need to solve something. Because it's your feelings that tell you when something is wrong. It's just your detached intellect that allows you to solve it once you've realized that it's wrong. So this is why, if you want to get in touch with femininity, true femininity, as a man, the only way to really do it is to get married and to have her be that feminine side. And you can actually then understand and perceive what true femininity is, because you live with it every day. And it becomes actually part of your everyday experience, even though it isn't you through your eyes. It almost is, because you become one. And what impacts one of you impacts the other. It is amazing. I've even realized, like, if I am feeling bad, but not bad, but like if I'm feeling discontent or upset or annoyed at something, my wife she doesn't even have to be near me. I'll just know that she's going to be feeling down a bit, and I know that she will, because I am feeling a bit down. It's so strange, and I've really noticed it over the past like month or two. And it's not just coincidence. That's another word I'm going to add to the bad word list. Coincidence. Anything that occurs, any two things that occur occur coincidentally, but that doesn't mean coincidence doesn't mean what we think it means. It used to mean like a coincidence, two things that are occurring, essentially simultaneously, or that are both occurring, two things that are both occurring, or multiple things that are both occurring. Today we mean multiple things that are all occurring or both occurring, and yet are not connected in any way, shape, or form, even if they look it. But that's impossible, because it doesn't follow the rules of the universe. Like, there's no such thing as randomness in mathematical determinism is real, but it's also like it's a superposition. Determinism cannot exist without choice. Like, God chose to create, and therefore it has been determined that life exists. Life grows. I won't say life exists. Life always existed. God is alive. Existence is a living, sentient singularity. It is a living being. But, multiplicity exists and growth exists because God chose to create. There's no way for God to have created without choosing. It had to be a conscious choice. How you create is not necessarily a choice, maybe it is on a level that we can't understand, but at least on the level that we would understand, it looks like the universe's rules are mathematically constrained to a total level, almost. Like, there's degrees of freedom of choice within that structure, but like the structure's shape is the same. There is no, it's people say things like Sean Carroll will be like, well, there could be another universe with different laws of physics, and Michio Kaku says stuff like this all the time, and it's nonsense. There is no other universe with different laws of physics, or there is no aeon there is no other aeon, or verse as I call it, or the observable universe essentially, that follows a different set of laws of physics. So there's a lineage of universes or verses or aeons, but they all follow the same rules, and within those rules you have the ability to make choices. But you wouldn't be able to make any choices if there wasn't any determinism, because if there wasn't, if going north, it's like if north didn't go north and south didn't go south, and you had to choose between the two, but they didn't go in any direction, then you aren't actually, there is no choice present. So in order to have choice, you must have determinism. It must be determined that north goes north and south goes south in order for you to have a choice between going north and south. But if there is no determinism, then there is no choice. And if there is objectively, if all there is one sentient singularity that is existence, and there is no multiplicity within it, in proto creation, I guess, or beyond creation, you could say before creation, but it's not really before, it's like outside creation, or beyond creation, then really like there is nothing determined, really. There is no determinism. And there's also no choice. God didn't choose to exist. God exists and probably has no choice. But he did choose to create us because he had to, because it is a state change that is against the nature of existence itself, which is to be intrinsically one with itself. All of existence is all of existence, and is, there's only one existence, and because of that, the nature of existence is to be one. And in order to create multiplicity of existence within that oneness, you have to go against your nature, and that is when actual free will or choice manifests. It's not just like, what did you eat for breakfast? It's not a free will choice, unless maybe you're like trying to choose something. You're like trying to lose weight, but you really want cake, but you chose. Now you have a choice of like, do I eat what my nature is telling me to eat, or do I eat what I objectively think is good to eat? That's different than like, are you in the mood for something salty or sweet? That's not a free will choice. It's not a choice at all, actually. So, it's Sam Harris in this conversation that I'm going to show in a minute. They also talk about free will, and the issue is that I like to say the word choice instead of free will, because free will is one of those bad words. It means something almost like more than choice, but it can't. If it does, then it's almost like free will is the negation of instincts in some ways, and is how it's taken, and that's not true. Choice is what you have when you have a choice between your instincts and also an objective understanding that is counter, with a conclusion that is counter to your instincts, and you have a choice between the two. Your instincts are never making a choice. If you're like, your instincts are they are in alignment with themselves. So if you open up the fridge and you are looking in there and there's cake, and then there's also brisket, and you look at it and you're like, I'm in the mood for salty, so I'm going to eat the brisket, or savory, whatever. Like, that is not a choice. It's just being. You're just being. But if you looked at the cake and you're like, I really want the cake, but I'm also, trying to lower my cholesterol, or it's a bacon cake and I'm Jewish and like that's not allowed, or Muslim or something, like, then choosing that, now you're faced with a quote unquote free will choice, but it's really just a choice. It's the only instance of choice. You don't have an instance of choice otherwise. You don't choose what music you like. The idea of like choosing that you chose what you wanted to eat for breakfast, outside of taking like health into consideration potentially, or God, is not a choice. It's just being. It's the same way as like, what kind of music do you like? What kind of music did you choose to listen to? Unless you chose to not listen to certain music because you think that it is bad for you, even though you want to listen to it, that would be a choice. But if just choosing what, oh, I'm in the mood for classical instead of rap today, that's not a choice. You're just being. So I'm adding free will to the bad word list. It's free will used to mean something different. It meant there's will, because there's God's will and there's our will. And they are, like, how we relate to them depends on the context. So there are certain circumstances where our will and God's will are aligned. And then there are certain circumstances where our will currently and God's will currently are not aligned. And in those instances where your will and God's will are not aligned, that's where you have freedom to choose between God's will or your will. Or you could even say your will or your will. Your will to do the right thing, or your will to do what your emotions want you to do. Like, if you really want a pair of Nikes and like you want to, your instincts are like, steal these or something. I don't know. I don't even have Nikes, but like, people steal Nikes. My brother told me the other day there's like a $10,000 pair of Nikes that tie themselves, and I have a $30 pair of indestructible shoes from Amazon. That it's what they're called, indestructible shoes. They're amazing. Steel toe, very comfortable, Kevlar soles, so you don't step on nails, and $30. They don't even have laces. It's like stretchy band. You don't need $10,000 self-tying shoes. But let's say you wanted those and you didn't have $10,000. Your instinct is telling you to steal them, but you also are contemplating the consequences and whether or not that's objectively not a good thing. Now you have a free will choice. But whether or not I wanted like green shoes or blue shoes is not a choice. There is no choice being made. It's just, you're just being. And those are instances in which there's no conflict between your will and God's will. God wants, I love the color green. Everything around me is green. This is green. My favorite snake is green. This knife is green. This pen is green. My guns are green. This lighter is green. I didn't choose these to like the color green. I'm just being. And if anybody asks me, like, what color would you want this in? And, assuming everything else removed, there's no contemplation of, well, you already have like 10 of those colors or something. Like, what color shirt would you want if you needed a shirt? Green. Okay, is that a choice? No, it's not. My favorite rapper is Hobson. Is that a choice? No. I don't know if it's Hobson, but he's one of my favorite rappers. I don't listen to rap that much anymore, but I used to. Hobson, Eminem. I was like way into it. Now I listen to all kinds of things. I was listening to these sea shanties. I think Elon Musk is like a fan of these. That's not why I got them. I saw it on Instagram. I'm afraid to play it, but here. You should look it up. There once was a ship that put to sea, and the name of the ship was a Billy O.T. It's pretty funny. I can't play anymore because I know that YouTube is going to cut the stream. They always do that with songs that I play. Played Lord's song once, that creepy one about AI, and like they cut the entire thing out. There need to be like 100 more people in, of course, break them up all over society will benefit. Sorry, I got distracted. I think a good part of my ego is adherence to my principles. What I believe helps society run smoother, better for kids, etc. Yes. Better for families. Whatever is good for the nuclear family is good for society. Because just as you are built of cells, society is built of castes, essentially, which is built on families. But individual organisms are also built of family lineages. It's there's a lineage component to a family, and then there's also the nuclear component to it, the assembly component. I'm full-blown not religious Christian. I don't care what or how many martyrs, God bless them, for spreading the good news. What is God's will? What is God's will? That is meaning. I'll say that. God's will is meaning and goodness. That is his will. Growth, meaning, and goodness, I would say. But beyond that, you're going to need to ask specific questions. Like, you can't just say, what is God's will? What is God's will in what situation? But objectively, I would say probably you'd have to label it with 3. And it would be like growth, meaning, and goodness, which goodness almost encapsulates both growth and meaning. But meaning also grows with, like, growth is the growth of meaning, because it's the growth of sentient beings, which is where meaning comes from. The vibration or frequency you give off is attracted to the vibration or frequency of the color green. Probably. I haven't thought too much about it, but a little bit, and I have looked at, like, what does the green represent? Like, what does that color represent? And it's like the reflection of yellow is how I think about it. I don't like look it up normally, but I like think about how it relates to the other colors, and it's so basically you have a binary triality, which is 6 primary and secondary colors, and you have 3 feminine, 3 masculine. The 3 feminine would be red, orange, and it would be red, and then its counterpoint would be green, I think, or blue, and then you would have yellow and orange. So yellow would be feminine, I think, and then I need to look at it. But obviously purple and red are feminine, and blue and green are masculine. I'm trying to correspond it to the quarks. Basically, like, you have up, down, charm, strange, truth, and beauty. So it's basically purple and green are truth and beauty, almost, I feel. And then you have charm and strange would be like probably orange and yellow, maybe. And then like up and uh, down would be like blue and red. So I don't know. I hear what you're saying, but how do you even know God exists? Because I've seen God, and I know that logically it is an inevitability that God exists, and I also saw God once. I've talked about it on the stream. Like, I know that sounds crazy if you haven't heard that before, me talk about it before, but I have talked about it before, and like there was a whole thing, like explaining it. But I mean, I saw God once, and I know God is real. I was not under any intoxication either, by the way. I was totally sober. I was in the shower, and I was thinking about the structure of the universe inevitably, and how we were probably in a simulation inside of another simulation, inside of another simulation, inside of another simulation, and so on. And I was thinking about like growth of biological life, and then tech, and then simulation, and then it repeats, and like in that we were like in one of those nested eggs inside of itself, just this repeating pattern that ends in a tech singularity. And I was an atheist my entire life, which is really an anti-theist. There's no such thing as an atheist. You can't be an atheist. You interact with existence every day, which means you have to have an opinion that leans either to believing that it is a sentient, self-aware, living being, or that it is just a dust ball that is filled with a bunch of sentient, self-aware living beings. And whichever way you lean, you are either a theist or an anti-theist. You can't be an atheist because everybody interacts with existence every day, which means they have to have an assumption, even if you might be 60% sure. You don't have to be 100% sure or anything, but be like 60% sure that there's no God. You would be like, you're an anti-theist. You're not an atheist. You can be agnostic about things that you don't interact with every day. Like I've said before, I'm agnostic about QAnon. I have friends that were into QAnon. I've never been into QAnon. I know nothing about it. I'm agnostic to it. I'm agnostic about Bigfoot. I've never seen Bigfoot. I've never looked into Bigfoot. I don't have an opinion on Bigfoot. But I am agnostic. That's just that. I don't have an opinion. You can't not have an opinion about whether or not existence is a living thing, because you are in existence every single day and you interact with it every single day. So, do you assume that it is a sentient living being? Then you're a theist. If you don't, and you assume that it's not, then you're an anti-theist. But I used to be an anti-theist that's self-described as an atheist, and then I basically tried to understand AI. That was the genesis of this project. I was trying to understand what is general intelligence, what is consciousness, how does a mind process and organize information and make decisions. It's all on my website, sentientsingularity.com. Link is in the bio if you want to have more context of the story. And then after a couple months of basically being like, yeah, it seems like it's logically inevitable that God is real, which God means that existence is a sentient living being. It is self-aware and it has feelings like you and me, and you're just a cell inside of it. And I just basically come to the conclusion that was inevitable. Like it was existence in life is just a fractal, and that means that what we are is what we are within. And also just the pattern that I had envisioned as the logical progression of life made sense that we were within a sentient being. And so once I had made that determination, just logically, I was like, okay, seems like logically inevitable that we are inside of a living being. Then I was thinking about that pattern one day in the shower, and I was like sucked out of my body, and I went through like the universe and through another universe and another one and another one and another one and another one. It was just like incredible. And then I was like just before a big white light, and I was basically just floating on my knees on front of this big giant like star looking being, not object, but being. And like you knew exactly what it was or who it was. And it's just white glowing ball that looks like a star, and you're like orbiting it basically. And then I heard this like message that was said, I'm showing you this because you're ready to see it. But it was like all at once. Every word of that sentence came at one time. It wasn't like I am showing you this. It was like boom in your head. And then it all reversed, and I went back into my body through the universes, and I just laid down on the floor of the shower and cried my eyes out like a baby for like 30 minutes. And then I couldn't even speak about it for like 2 years without crying, and I barely told anyone. But I've told it enough now where I can actually discuss it. But I mean, I know God exists. I don't just have faith. I am aware. I've never had anything like that happen since. I was totally sober. But what it was interesting is the message that I got of, I'm showing you this because you're ready to see it. It wasn't like, oh, you're so special, Tyler. It was like, you are being shown this because you understand what you're being shown. Because I was thinking about exactly what I saw. I was like, we're inside of a simulation through technology, and that's inside of another one, and inside of another one, inside of another one, and each one of these is essentially a universe. And as soon as I thought about that structure, I literally got to see it. And then I got the message of, I'm showing you this because you're ready to see it. And that was it. There was nothing else. And the thing is like, if I had seen what I saw and I wasn't already thinking about exactly what I saw, I would have gone to the hospital and said that I had a stroke. Like, that's what you would think, because I wasn't on any drugs. So like, it's one thing to take DMT and see something like that. It's another to be sober and washing your hair and just thinking about like simulation hypothesis and see that. You would, if I didn't see exactly what I was thinking about, and if the entire experience didn't make perfect sense, which it literally made perfect sense, which is crazy to say considering what the experience was. But in any other context, if anything else was different, it would not have made sense. I would have gone to the hospital and I would have said, I think I had a stroke. And then that also makes perfect sense with what I was told. I'm showing you this because you're ready to see it. It's like, if I wasn't already thinking about it, I would not have been ready to see it. I was only ready to see it because I already had come to the conclusion myself. It wasn't like I was being shown something that I didn't understand. I was being shown something that I had deduced independently. And then it was like I was being shown, you're correct. I understand. I've never had that experience before that or since then. And I understand that sounds like a crazy experience if you've never had that experience. I understand that it's very rare. I don't think I'm the only person that's had that experience. I know I'm not. I've read accounts of others. But it is rare. And I get that the immediate reaction would be, this guy is a liar, or who is a narcissist or something, making up stories. I couldn't make that up. I literally couldn't. I can't write. I've written one poem in my life. Or I am just, a schizophrenic or something, crazy person, which I do think schizophrenia is misunderstood, but I am not schizophrenic. So I've never had this experience before or since. And it also it made perfect sense. So it's not like it was this crazy experience where I just like lost my mind. I didn't lose my mind. It was very emotional, but like, it was the most emotional moment of my entire life. But I understand why that sounds like nonsense if you've never experienced it, because I had never experienced it prior to that, and I haven't experienced it since. So my normal state is not having that. I don't do DMT, or I've never done DMT. I've never had a theophany while on any kind of drugs, like, ever. I don't do hallucinogens. I tried mushrooms and college a couple times and never. I mean, the world was pretty and colorful, but it wasn't like I saw God. And I tried LSD once in Joshua Tree a little bit, like when I was in college too. And I just thought DMX was like really funny. I didn't see God. So I understand people see this kind of stuff when they're on DMT. I don't recommend taking hallucinogenic drugs to get that experience. If you take hallucinogenic drugs to see beyond, specifically to see the beyond, like to see that which you've not yet seen, like if you want to see God, I don't think that you'll see him in proper context if you take DMT. If you take DMT, it's like you want to see the president and you like snuck onto the White House grounds and you're like peering in through the windows of the Oval Office, versus like trying to understand God and then being like invited to the White House. It's different. If you're not invited to the White House, you're not going to see the context of the situation that you would need to see, probably. That's my thoughts, just based on what I've seen from people that have done a lot of DMT and stuff, and they'll say, well, I realized it's all consciousness, we're all one, God exists, machine elves or something, and then they'll say, but the difference is it didn't impact their lives in like a moral sense, even if it impacted their emotional relationship to it, and like people get spiritual, quote unquote. But it's like, I've given up every single one of my favorite foods in the world since I had this experience. I got married because of this experience. I was intrinsic, my entire moral perspective was flipped upside down almost because of this experience. My goals changed because of this experience. My fears changed because of this experience. It's not the same. I have not noticed that when people take DMT and they see, conscious existence, they don't change their morals. They don't change their perspective on right and wrong and politics and fear and relationships and like romance. I mean, every aspect of my life changed. Every aspect of my life. Everything that I thought I would always be eating ham and cheese sandwiches with a side of like shrimp cocktail and having dogs. I do have dogs now, but I don't know if I'll ever get other dogs again. I love my dogs, but I don't know how good they are for us. And like, that's part of my perspective shift. And I don't think they're good for us. I think that they are like, they can be there for you emotionally in moments where you would need like support a little bit, but it's not even real support. It's like they're not like helping you move your life forward usually, unless you become like super into like agility courses and it like gets you to meet people or something. Like, dogs just delay your desire to have children and take up your resources that you could be using to build your life. And they are messy. Like, they are dirtier than we think. Like, I grew up with dogs my entire life. We always had like 2-3 dogs, and big dogs. Like, my first dog was the biggest dog in the world. It's an Irish Wolfhound. Like, I really like dogs. And I also really like pork. I don't eat it anymore. I really liked shellfish. Don't eat it anymore. I'm not saying that you have to do that, by the way, if you ever meet God. You don't have to take the same route I did. You just have to do what you think is right. And I'm just telling you what I thought was right. And like, that involved giving up all my favorite foods all of them almost, and like without hesitation. It was crazy. It was crazy. That doesn't happen if you do DMT and then see that the universe is consciousness. It just, people will be like, oh yeah, like we're all one, but like they don't change their entire moral outlook on life. That comes from the proper contextualization of seeing God. It's not just about peering in the window. It's about like realizing where you came from and who you're subject to and who you should be grateful to. And like that doesn't happen when you're just like peering at somebody through the window and all of a sudden you don't feel gratitude for that person and you don't feel submissive to that person. And like if you see the president through the window, like you don't have any emotions for that. It's just like a cool experience. Whereas like the president invites you into the White House, like personally, you're submissive. It's not your house. Like the procedure to get there is contextualizing of who is in control, like, and the entire process itself, because it's done for a reason. Like I had no control over this situation. I did not try and see God. Like I didn't even know that was possible. And I've tried since and I've failed. I mean, I feel God all the time. I've communicated with God through like learning how to ask the right questions in certain circumstances. And then you can literally feel like your emotions, your mind being moved on in the quantum substructure of reality. You can feel yourself being moved. Like when you say, oh, that painting moves me, it's like, so, God can do the same thing. He just pushes you a little. You can feel it, but it's not the same as like what I saw. That was like another level, and I've not been able to do it since. It was like a total tangent, but I also couldn't explain that experience without explaining the totality of that experience. I can't just say, yeah, I saw God. Like, you can't do that. It's something that when you speak about it, you have to speak about it and give it its due context. When I was first telling a friend of mine who went to Catholic school, and I was an anti-theist, but I called myself an atheist, but he went to Catholic school, so I figured he was religious, but he actually is not. But I didn't know that because I didn't understand religion at the time. So I called him months after I had had this experience, and I was like, dude, I gotta tell you something. Like, I was like, I saw God. And I was like afraid to say it, and the phone cut out. And I was like, he was like, sorry, the phone did something really weird. And I was like, okay, let me try this again. I saw God. And he was like, sorry, man, the phone cut out again. It's doing something really weird. And immediately in my head, I just was like, I knew what was wrong. And it was that I was hesitating. It's like, you can't hesitate when you say, I saw God. You have to, if you are hesitant in saying it, then you shouldn't be saying it. It took me a long time to be able to get confident enough to say that. You'll know you'll be judged and like by other people for saying something like that, but that's fine. I don't really care. Like if you've seen God, you don't care about the judgment of other people. You just care about God's judgment. It's very freeing, but it's also like not freeing because now you actually feel like there's an objective moral authority, but you also don't give a crap, to use a 4-letter curse word, about what anybody else thinks, because why the heck would you care? Like, you would not care, trust me. That is also one of those things that like changes if you've seen it in context. If you've seen the president through the window, you don't care about his opinion, but if he invites you to his home, you do. Okay, like this is I've said this before. Contextualization, context is the key to understanding, and you cannot understand God if the context is not one of where you realize who is the boss. And not just who's the boss, but like what they did. Like you owe them everything. It's not even like, oh, they're just like this cop that's going to catch you speeding. It's like, no, they literally are responsible for your very existence consciously. So it's like reverent. It's reverence is a better word. You know, there's a quote in the Torah that says like, wisdom begins with fear of God, and wisdom, according to Sentient Singularity Theory, objectively, and yes, it is possible to deduce this, and from what my work shows, it does look like the deduction of what objective wisdom means, like wisdom objectively means, is that you're construct aware, which means like you are aware that you are thinking, feeling, self-aware being, and you're inside of a thinking, feeling, self-aware being, and you are made of thinking, feeling, self-aware beings. You're construct aware. You're aware of the environment objectively that you're within and the nature of it. It's an objective level of wisdom versus like, I'm wise in the kitchen, or I'm wise, at like which rides at Disneyland, at which rides are the best. I don't know. Like, I don't go to Disneyland, but there's subjective like things you can be wise to through experience, but then there's objective wisdom, and that is knowing the nature of yourself and also the nature of the construct that you're in and the constructs that you're made of, and that they are all the same. And that is objective wisdom. So that begins with reverence of God, not just knowledge. First I was like, it's not the fear of God, it's the knowledge of God. It's a mistranslation probably. But it's not that. It's not just the knowledge, and it's not just the fear. It's the superposition of the two, but it's also this added one, which is like gratitude. You're grateful and you're fearful, and you're also aware, like you are aware of their existence, not that you have faith. I don't have faith. I had faith when I had this experience. I had not faith, but I had like logically deduced that it seemed inevitable. And this was like through science, like quote unquote, like scientific, like tone to this entire project. It wasn't trying to know like the Bible. I was trying to understand whether or not AI was going to kill us, or whether or not it was going to save us. And in order to do that, you have to understand consciousness. And when you do that, when you do understand consciousness, and then you look at physics, you realize that they're the same, because obviously the rules of our world would line up with the rules of a mind if you're inside of a mind. So if you understand the rules of a mind, you understand that why physics rules and the standard model lines up with the structures of consciousness. And no, it's an amazing journey. But I knew though that I had to like commit when I was talking to my friend. I kind of got off track. When I was telling him that I had seen God in the shower, I knew. I was like, I have to commit. I have to say it confidently. And I said it confidently, and he was like, okay, now I hear you. I heard you that time. And I was like, okay. And I even said to him, I was like, I know that this happened because I wasn't saying it confidently, and like that's probably not allowed. You can't say, oh, I saw God, and not say it confidently. And he like to this day would say that was one of the weirdest experiences on the phone he's ever had. Like, it was not just that the phone was cutting out because of reception problems. It was like obvious that it was intentionally cutting in a way it was like somebody was muting and like choosing exactly the perfect time to mute it. And the intentionality was obvious to him, not just to me. It was very weird. It's very weird. Yeah, you don't get that from DMT. Not saying you can't get insights from, altered states of consciousness. You definitely can. But I don't have any, like, my experience with that, nothing was confusing. It was one of the clearest moments I've ever had in my entire life. It might have even been the clearest moment of my entire life. It was perfect clarity. Everything made sense. I saw what I was expecting to see. What I did see made perfect sense, and like I had no questions after. I was just in awe, and I was grateful, and I was like, I had reverence, but I had no questions. When you take DMT and you see like machine elves, or even if you like feel that we're all one and something, like usually have like a lot of questions afterwards, and it's kind of foggy and like chaotic, and I know that from just my experiences with just other drugs. Like I mean, I've had states where I really like my reality melted from like, you know, just I had eaten like too big of a pot brownie, and like I thought I was melting like once when I was like in I said I was melting. My brother was like, "You're not melting, stop." But I was like 19 or something like that, and I was like, "I'm melting, I'm melting." It's like, "You're not melting." So I've had like crazy like experiences but that was like very early on when I just like I was a kid and I was trying a pot brownie for the first time, and you know, my reality disappeared. But it was like, it's not like I can say that made sense, that experience. It didn't make any sense. I was just like melting into the carpet. But and I understand DMT is different. I really do believe DMT allows you to see frequencies of existence that you cannot normally perceive, like how there are frequencies of light that you can't perceive. I think DMT changes your frequency and lets you perceive things like frequencies of life that you can't normally perceive, and like higher frequencies of life. But I think it lets you see angels and demons and God and the connectedness of it all. But I used to want to try DMT because couldn't understand what any of them were saying or trying to explain. But I would watch these videos in college of like people describing their DMT experiences, and the only thing I realized was they were all saying the same thing. And I was like, okay, they're all saying the same thing, so nobody's making it up, but it doesn't make any sense to me. And after I had this experience, it all makes perfect sense. I don't ever have to do DMT, and I've totally lost my desire to do DMT. I don't think I would ever do any other like hallucinogenic drugs ever in my life. And like I am done with any kind of like recreational drug use, I would think. I mean, I'll have like, I don't know, like I'll have a beer like once a year, maybe 2 beers once a year. I don't drink, and I don't smoke weed anymore. Haven't in years. So, but I'm not against it or anything, but you know, it's hard to like smoke a bunch of weed and or drink a lot and have like a productive life. Everything in context, that's what I'll say. I on my right before my wedding, me and my groomsmen had some shots. And that was like the last time I drank. And between all of us, it's like 6 of us or something like that, 7 maybe. We like drank a fifth of what's it called? Whiskey. And like that is okay in that context. But like I don't just drink. That was like, I'll drink for right before my wedding with my groomsmen. Then a creator father figure is inevitable. Yes, thank you for sharing that experience. You're welcome. I thank you for listening to it. It's took me a long time to share, but I've shared it enough now that it's like, might as well. But I can't, it's not something I can be like, yeah, I saw God, like, that, don't worry about it, I've talked about it in the past. It's like, you have a ton of questions if I say that, and also, it doesn't, like, you can't do that. That's like insulting to God to do that. And if there's anyone I don't want to insult, it's God. Knowing something you can't fully explain, I would bet my life and more God's real. I would absolutely bet I would bet not just my life, I would bet the lives of every single person in the world that God is real. That's how positive I am. The only other thing that comes close to my level of confidence that God is real is that I am real. And that's it. Like, I don't even have that level of confidence about, like, my family. And I do believe that they're real, too, because I think that it doesn't make sense that you're the only real one in the simulation. That it destroys meaning. Meaning is your impact on another sentient being. If there's no other sentient beings in the simulation or in the world, then there's no meaning. So it's like you're on Xbox Live. You're not just playing campaign. I have livid dreams and accidentally huffed gas, and I swear it was an accident in the age of 6, and I saw the mirrored image forever stuck until I screamed God for me to leave. Interesting. Yeah, you gotta be careful. Like, I was just like burning styrofoam for a class project when I was in like 6th grade, I think. Or not 6th grade, it was 9th grade. It was my first year of high school. And I just remember like that was the first time I had ever like been intoxicated. And I did it by accident. We were like burning styrofoam for a sculpture. And I looked over at my friend and he looked at me and we both knew immediately. We were like, we are really like, we're high as shit. I didn't even know what it felt like before then to be like that. But that's horrible. Like, we were not trying to be. We were in art class and we were like trying to make a sculpture. We were carving a styrofoam with a soldering iron, and like it was inside. It was very stupid. I don't know why we were allowed to do that. That's like cancerous. That's not good. Burning styrofoam. I know that reality exists where the mind creates a focus. I changed my perspective on my whole life, which was the military and Mormonism when I took mushrooms. Interesting. So you joined the military and became a Mormon? Or you got out of that? I think Mormonism is fascinating. I have a Book of Mormon. I haven't read it, but like I can tell that Joseph Smith saw some stuff. Like, I know people like mock it, but by their fruit you will know them. Like, and look at the fruit of Mormonism. It's got some fruit. Seeing God wouldn't be what I think he wants anyways. He wants you to be joyful and create. Yes, I think most of the time God doesn't want you to see him. I think it's like, why? I think for most of the time to see God is not useful. I think it was intentional for me to see that just that one time. It wasn't like, oh, he's like, we're such homies. Like, I'm being, I could just hang out. And I do, like, I think that I am close to God. I think I try to be close to God. Sometimes I'm closer than I am than others. Sometimes I'm closer than others. Good deeds get you closer to good actions get you, and thoughts get you closer to God, and sins take you further away from God. But they decrease your awareness. But anything that decreases your awareness takes you away from God. But it's clear to me, it seems to be at least, that like me seeing that, having that experience was relevant to this project. And like, if I wasn't doing this project, I would not have had the need to see that. Like, and I've had other people talk to me about experiences that they've had with God, where they were having addiction problems, and then they had a theophany once where basically they literally heard a voice being like, do you even like love yourself? Like, do you even care about yourself, or something like that? And like, they 180 their entire life. That's how you know it was real, because like they changed their whole life because of it. And but it wasn't like what I experienced, but it was what they needed. And whatever is the purpose of God has his reasons for doing what he does, but I don't think it's productive for most people to see what I saw. And I also think that it would be, because it's not productive, it would be counterproductive. It's like, what's the point of somebody having that information if they're not trying to make this, like, why, if you're not supposed to make that, then why would you have that experience? It's not that it's like only some people are good enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not any better than anyone else. But it's about, like, intentions, like they're God's intentions, and context, and everybody is here for a reason, and otherwise we wouldn't be here. And somehow that experience was tied to my reason to be here. And that's true of everybody's relationship with God. Even if you don't see God, that's an intentional action by God. He is purposely hiding. And that is because seeing him would not help you right now. It is probably essential that you don't see God if you're not seeing God. That doesn't mean that you're not good enough. It means he knows what you need. That's it. At least in that moment, maybe one day, what you need changes. I was an anti-theist. I thought God was stupid. I told my rabbi at 13 years old that God did not exist and that it was nonsense. So, like, but that was what I needed at the time. If I didn't have that at the time, I don't think I would have been so fascinated by biology and ecology and all these other things, herpetology and all these tech, all these things that I needed to have, general understanding of in order to build this project. Got a bit off topic, but I mean, it's good though, because context is important. And like I've said, with these words, even, you can't just use some of these words without it being counterproductive. If I had just said, oh, I saw God, and then moved on, it would have definitely been counterproductive. I know that it is a teacher plant organism. Yeah, it's hard for me to directly just say, I see our buddy joking, interacting in chat isn't helping my case. The chronology of my posts is misleading. I'm not sure what you mean, but I also am probably missing some context because of chat is moving. Oh, there's a people leaving the chat. That's what it is. Anyways, I'm gonna go. That's it. Bad words are words that distract us from meaning and lead us down a path that cannot be reconciled and understood. We're going to talk more about it another day. I couldn't just say, quickly what I was asked previously. But we're going to get more into this. I'm going to do some work on it. And there's definitely something going on with these words and or even just words in general, what causes them to gain and lose meaning. And that's part of what I'm trying to understand a bit more as well. So till next time, people, I really appreciate every single one of you. If you'd like to share this with somebody who you think would find it valuable, go for it. If you'd like to join our Discord community, send me a private message on Instagram and I will send you the link. I have a live call every Thursday at 7 p.m. Pacific time on there with everyone who wants to join, and it goes on for hours and you can talk about anything that you want, and it's just a private phone call, voice to voice, which is very nice. Also, go to sentientsingularity.com and scroll to the bottom of the homepage, please, and sign up for my email list, because they're going to kick anybody working on this type of stuff off of YouTube. If you're going to tie truth to ethics or morals, then if you're going to advocate for an objective morality, then and responsibilities, then you're going to be kicked off of YouTube eventually. So we have a plan. It's a long-term plan. Short-term plan is sign up for the email list, and so that you can keep up to date with where things are. Still working on the paper. Should be done by the end of the month, hopefully. If not, goal is to finish it by my birthday, which is the middle of January. But I think I might be able to get it done before then. And with that, I will see you tomorrow. And